Let us gather our hearts. Almighty God, in whom we live, love, and have our being, we take time today to remember. We remember all who served, all who lost their lives to war and service to the Union and our beloved country, whose sacrifice has been marked by this monument with a deep and an abiding gratitude. We trust that you will be with us in this time of honoring the 104th Pennsylvania. And we ask that our hearts be moved to rededicate more than this monument. Inspire us, O God. Let their service inspire in us that same selflessness and bravery with which they served their country. May today's rededication spur us on to honorable service, civil discourse, and rededication to union and our common life, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Amen.
I am Lieutenant Edward Fretz, and I want to thank all the members of those three groups who have worked to put together the program that we have today. And I want to thank all of you for showing up in such miserable weather. All three of our organizations are very grateful to our corporate sponsor, Monument Bank, who has financed the procedures that we have today. And situated as we are right in the center of Doylestown, it's appropriate that we have today with us the Doylestown Mayor, His Honor Ronald Strauss.
You know, this is sort of a special event for me for some other reasons. I grew up with an uncle who went by the name of Grant, and a grandfather who went by a more traditional name of Ulysses. My grandfather was born three miles from here in 1865, and his name was Ulysses Grant Strauss. So General Grant, you may have been, I think there are a few thousand people named Ulysses Grant in 1865, but you may know some of them and been invited to their christenings.
One for sure is my son.
There you go. There you go. But you're going to hear a lot about the War Memorial Field down the street and Camp Lacey and the 104th and the monument that's dignifies the sacrifices of those in the 104th. Together, the monument and the parade, which will take place on a beautiful day, Monday a week, you realize that the parade also signifies the 150th anniversary of an event that the only continuous parade that can claim that distinction. There are so many monuments to the Civil War. In Gettysburg alone, there are 1,300. Now, in communities around the country, obviously, there are a lot fewer monuments. You know, they stand with significant presence in communities like our own. But what gives them life are the associations, the historical societies that remind us what that monument stands for. So here in Doylestown, clearly it is the Doylestown Historical Society and the Mercer Museum and the Civil War Roundtable that remind us of our significant history, that remind us of the role we have played throughout our country's history, in the case of Doylestown, from Native Americans down the street to the Civil War to much more recent history. So this is about the monument, but it is also an opportunity to honor those organizations that give a ongoing historic memory to our community going forward. So as much as we honor the monument, I would like to honor those three organizations as well. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Ron. One other reminder here, in honor of this event, the monument has received a thorough cleaning from top to bottom and then treated with a preservative, and that work was done by Eugene Hough, who's here. Gene, right there. He was assisted in that by some of the staff from the Doylestown Borough, and that work again was financed by Monument Bank and Doylestown Borough. We thank both of those organizations. A few of the ladies of the GAR are with us today. They're seated back there. And we also have quite a few members who are here, people who are here today who are descendants of members of the 104th. And I'd like to thank them for showing up on such a bright, sunshiny day. And lastly, as I look around here, I see a lot of people who are veterans of the service organizations. So our sponsor, our host groups, all three of them, as well as Monument Bank, would like to thank each and every one of you veterans for your service to our country. Thank you. Now the monument. Again, I am Lieutenant Edwin Fretz. I was a native of Doylestown. I served in the 104th in Company A. That was one of the two companies from Doylestown. But in civilian life, I was a printer by trade. I worked for the Doylestown Democrat. And our offices were right down the street here on Burt Street. My boss was the owner and editor of the Democrat, William W.H. Davis. And during the war with Mexico, Davis had served as an officer in the Mexico City campaign. And so when the rebels started the war down in Fort Sumter, and President Lincoln shortly thereafter called for 500,000 volunteers, Davis was breveted a colonel in the volunteer army by the Secretary of War with two stipulations. One, all 10 of his 100-man companies were to be recruited from within Bucks County. The 104th was to be strictly a Bucks County unit. And two, once organized, the regiment was to drill and train in Doylestown, not in the state capital, which was the norm. So Davis got right with that. Selected as a camp, a big open field well west of the borough at that time. It had previously been the county fairground. He named it Camp Lacey after the Revolutionary War general from Warminster, John Lacey. I won't go into all of the details of goings on, except mention one thing. Davis, having served in a subtropical climate down in Mexico City, recognized very well that an important factor in the efficiency of his troops was going to be their health. And from the very get-go, he did everything to take care of his boys, as he called us. We were all inoculated for smallpox before we left Doylestown, which was a rarity at that time. The very first week of camp, he marched the whole regiment down to Neshaminy Creek for a regimental bath, which he continued on a weekly basis the rest of our service term. He took care of us. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of all of our service results during our term of service. I'll just mention the two most severe tests that we underwent. The first of these occurred on the last day of May, 1862. The regiment had fought their way all up the Virginia Peninsula. We were 5 miles from the Confederate capital at Richmond, prepared to go in and end the war the next day. But weather does interfere with things. The there was an all-night torrential rain, continued well into the next day, flooded the rivers behind us, isolated our corps from all the rest of the army, so that when we were attacked the next day, we were seriously outnumbered. Did well to prevent a complete disaster. That battle was known as the Battle of Fair Oaks, or in the South as Seven Pines. And in that one-day struggle, the 104th lost 191 men killed and captured, and another 53 taken prisoners. It was a very tough day for the 104th, and boys from Bucks County. Our other severe test came just outside of Charleston, South Carolina, at Fort Wagner. Fort Wagner was an earthen fort built on the shore of their harbors. Together with Fort Sumter in the middle of the harbor, the two forts controlled shipping into the one channel that was available. So the task given the 104th, take that fort and shut down the harbor. The first two attempts at doing this were mismanagements at the top, so they changed generals. And for the third attempt, they reinforced our brigade with a brigade of colored soldiers from Massachusetts. This attack was depicted on film about 20 years ago or so in the movie Glory. You may have seen it. It featured Morgan Freeman in the title role. The only way to take an earthen fort at that time, cannonballs will break up a masonry fort, but the earthen fort they just bury in the mud. The only way to take it is to go up over the top and hope you can take it with the bayonet before you get shot to pieces. And that third attempt, both our brigade and the Massachusetts fellows were badly shot up. Severe casualties. We did take the fort on our next attempt with some help from the Navy, who brought their howitzers in very close and lobbed shells into the fort. And that's where we were stationed essentially the rest of our duty term. Fort Wagner sits on about a 3-mile round barren sandbar, completely void of vegetation. And Fort Wagner at the corner was within range of the cannon that the Confederates had across the harbor. So every day, according to Davis's tally, they dropped about 200 shells in there. So one day out of 4, you were on duty at Fort Wagner. The other 3, you either baked or froze on the sandbar. Davis thought he'd give us something to do. He secured a bake oven, and our regiment baked bread for all the rest of the soldiers in the Charleston area. By the time, they had to turn in their flour ration, and for 5 cents we gave them a loaf of fresh bread. And by the time that our tour of duty was finished, the regiment had accumulated a little over $1,600. That was pretty good money in those days. And it was only shortly after the regiment got back to Bucks County that a group of the soldiers petitioned Davis to see if he couldn't get permission from the War Department to use those regimental funds to build some sort of a memorial to their fallen comrades. Well, Davis was on that in a New York second. That was his thing. And Davis is the man primarily responsible for that monument. He got permission from the War Department to use the funds. He sketched out his ideas of what he wanted incorporated, and he contracted with a stonemasonry firm from Philadelphia to complete the work. That firm is still in business today, by the way, Struthers and Company. The agreed upon price was $2,500. Like many contracts, it overran. The final price was $2,900. Three of Davis's good friends, his very long-time friend, John Wanamaker from Philadelphia, Congressman Zell from Philadelphia, and his commanding officer during most of the war, Henry Nagley, each contributed $100 to that shortfall. And the rest of the shortfall was contributed by the 6 citizens of Bucks County in either $5 or $10 increments. So the citizens contributed appreciably to that monument. And it was shortly, the monument was started in 1866 and finished in 67. And when it was finished, it was one of the first 3 Civil War monuments built in the United States. One of the first 3. And it was only a few days after the completion that our national government declared that May 30th of each year would be set aside as a national holiday of remembrance. And they called it Decoration Day at that time to encourage the citizens to decorate the graves of the fallen with floral arrangements. And so it was on May 30th, 1868, the first Decoration Day, that the monument was dedicated. And they had a grand and glorious affair that day. The weather was better than it was today. They had a band. They had a general from Washington as the speaker. The monument base was completely covered with floral arrangements. And the 104th was all back in uniform and attended. And at the end of it, everybody was so exuberant that General Davis led an impromptu parade from the monument base out to his old camp at Camp Lacey. And there, in a separate ceremony of memory, Davis officially renamed Camp Lacey as War Memorial Field. The name still retained today by the athletic field in one corner of his base. Next year rolled around, the citizens thought that was a really good thing. They prevailed upon Davis to organize another parade. So he did. And the third year, again, and so forth. So the parade route has been changed over the year, but it's been held every year. So from that first Decoration Day, the parade has become, as Ron said, the oldest continuously held, now Memorial Day parade in the United States. You can come out in 9 days and see this year's edition, and the predictions are better than for today. Some of you, as I look around, were here several years ago when the Roundtable had as our guest President Abraham Lincoln. The President had his share of highs and lows during the war, but he never left his focus. He kept his focus on the job at hand. And so it was with today's guest. Arguably, the one man most responsible for our military success in that struggle. He also had his share of professional and military and personal highs and lows. He didn't let this stop him. He kept his focus. It is my pleasure to introduce to you that man, our guest speaker for today, General Ulysses S. Grant.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Any afternoon we can get together and honor these fallen for the Republic is truly a good afternoon, I believe, regardless of the weather. True soldiers don't mind the weather because we've endured it throughout all of our tribulations. And I appreciate, on behalf of the government and the War Department, that you're all here to share in that today. I have a few words I'd like to share. Comrades and other devoted Americans, Always with sorrow and deepest respect do we meet each month of May to honor all those who have fallen to preserve the Republic. When we stood shoulder to shoulder under the flag to protect home and country, we never imagined a day that we might be called again, but stand ready should we be called for such a thing. We all know the cost to preserve the Union, and surely know some who paid with the dearest blood of all our families and comrades. It is for us then to remember their sacrifices and never allow their honorable service to be tarnished or forgotten. It is proper and appropriate to pause each year to meet with old comrades in arms and to live over again in memory the trials and hardships of those days in service to our Republic. Hardships imposed for the preservation and perpetuation of our free institutions should never be taken for granted, and the memory of all those who gave the final measure of devotion should forever be honored each year. We believe then, and believe now, that we had a good government, worthy fighting for, and if need be, dying for. How many of our comrades of those days paid the latter price for our preserved Union? Let their heroism and sacrifices be evergreen and in our memories. Let not the results of their sacrifices be destroyed. The Union and the free institutions for which they fell should be held more dear for their sacrifices. God bless them, their families, and the United States of America.
Thank you, General.
My pleasure.
Okay, we are going to conclude our program today with a roll call of those from the 104th who paid that supreme sacrifice. The 104th, during the course of their service, lost 150 men. Now, put that in perspective, the population of Bucks County at that time was 1/10 of what it is today. The same thing happened today. It would be 1,500 men would have their names on that monument right over there. And 150 years have passed since that monument was dedicated. But 150 years ago, those scars and hurts were just as severe and deep as they are today for the friends and relatives of the men who were over there on that monument. So lest we forget, we're going to have a roll call to conclude our program today of the men from the 104th who lost their lives during the war. And while that is going on, there's going to be some wreaths laid on the monument and flags put into place around the monument. The roll calls will be made in 3 pairs of individuals. The first pair are members of the Baker Fisher Camp 101 Sons of Union Veterans. And Walt Lafty and Steve Worthington will read those names. Steve will be reading the name of one of his ancestors who lost his life at the Battle of Fair Oaks. The other 4 readers will be members of today's 104th. And at the conclusion of the roll call, Ron Haskell from our roundtable group will play taps. That will conclude our program. Thank you. Readers, Ron, the readers will be assisted by Private James Donovan, wherever James Donovan is. Okay. James is going to assist those, and they will read then in pairs.
William J. Shattinger.
James States.
Joseph Silva.
Thomas Stevens,
James Brearley,
Thomas Ross,
Abraham Gill,
John Riley,
John S. Hartley,
John Sees,
George S. McGill,
Nathaniel Gay,
Samuel S. Clayton,
Charles Nagel,
Samuel A. Watson,
Henry Lutz,
Morris Crispin,
William Richards,
Moses R. Shaw,
Amos Stackhouse,
Thomas Wincoop,
Solomon Siders,
William W. H. Brown,
William Cutler,
Peter Baltz,
John W. Bissey,
Henry Butterworth,
Daniel R. Howe,
Adolphus Diffenbrook,
William A. Howell,
Charles S. Hart,
John Lee,
Samuel Margarine,
Joseph Schofield,
James Muir,
John Stringer,
James McNeil,
William Fugel,
William B. Nicholas,
George W. Radcliffe,
Edward S. Whalen,
Thomas Lear,
Matthias Saylor,
William H. Ruth,
Charles Eastburn,
Louis H. Eckert,
Wilson Freiling,
Charles Bartley,
Abraham Angany,
Jacob R. Brinker,
Charles Arnold,
Abraham Whitaker,
William A. Reynolds,
Samuel A. Stackhouse,
William Malsbury,
Isaac L. Lambert,
Thomas B. Whittlefield,
Amandus Lilly,
Mordecai B. Smith,
Gottlieb Herfurter,
Henry Gallagher,
William Irwin,
Edwin S. Darling,
John Eckline,
Henry Fell,
John Mundy,
Zachariah Baker,
Martin Hoford,
Tunis K. Smith,
Daniel Brinzinger,
John Hilborn,
William Rode,
Abraham Sylvie,
Hugh Bradley,
James McGuigan,
George Devons,
Joseph Mullen,
John Hassett,
George Marlin,
Milton Sellers,
Joseph B. Smith,
Adolph Moore,
Charles Slight,
Robert Kinsey,
William Haverstraw,
Joseph Lee,
Joseph Heist,
James Baker,
Henry Dilliard,
William P. Slack,
Jacob Croman,
Jacob Birtles,
James Nan,
Gilbert S. Sellers, Aaron Thompson,
Jonathan Kennedy,
Oliver W. Beam,
James Morris,
Samuel Clemens,
William Rowland,
Charles Gamble,
Elias Wolfe,
Henry Greisemer,
Thomas Woodward,
Jacob Henn,
Theodore Boyles,
John Schwartz,
Thomas Dunn,
Thomas Scarborough,
Charles Osborne,
George Moyer,
Jackson H. Ortle,
Edgar S. Bailey,
Frederick Seller,
Christian Blitzstein,
Henry Scher,
Stephen G. Hibbs,
Israel Boyer,
James Harford,
Charles Wiggins,
William E. Parsons,
Charles R. Kramer,
Frank C. Worthington,
William Lee,
Joseph Baker,
Benjamin F. Street,
Thomas Cosner,
Charles Webster,
John Lurch,
William Hart,
Henry Marcellus,
George Johnson,
Henry Bauer,
Lieutenant E. S. McDowell,
Anthony Bauer,
Lieutenant Philip Burke,
James Gallagher,
Major John M. Grice,